So I'd like to call up the Accounting and Other Issues panel, which is really the final panel that we have for you today. This panel is going to be moderated by Ian Palm. He's a partner and critical member of our blockchain team here at Gowling WLG. On the panel as well is PARITOSH GAMBHIR. He's a partner in the financial services and also the head of blockchain at KPMG. We also have LEOPOLD. He's a partner in the National Banking and Capital Markets Assurance Leader for PwC. And then we also have MORENCY, who is a Senior Vice President, Financial Institutions Practice Leader for Arthur Gallagher Canada, and will speak to insurance issues. So we're just going to mic them up, and while they're being mic'd, I'm going to also hand to Ian Palm the microphone, and you can start the panel with the microphone as well.
So this morning we've been exploring some really interesting issues, and USMAN and Hillary started off with, exploring some of the opportunities, and then our next panel looked at some of the use cases, which is great. And then we had some interesting discussion around the legal issues, which was fascinating, and I deal with that on a regular basis in some of the advice that we're giving. But now we want to sort of switch gears a little bit and focus on some other things. And I want everyone to remember we're challenging accepted norms here. We live with every day. Like, this is how a business process works. But when we throw a distributed ledger technology into the mix and blockchain, we then challenge those business norms. And we've got some people on our panel here. We've got some senior people at KPMG and at PwC, and we've also got a representative from Gallagher, all very well-established, large organizations, and I think they should be commended for diving into the blockchain big time. And so we've got, to my immediate right here, we've got Ryan Leopold, and Ryan's a partner at PwC, and he is the National Banking and Capital Markets Leader for PwC, and I'll let him get into detail on this thing, but he's also got extensive experience in dealing with various financial institution sectors, but he's also responsible for exploring the impact on cryptocurrency for PwC across a number of jurisdictions, and is leading their global cryptocurrency accounting working group, and I think it's representing 30-odd countries that are part of the group?
We're up to 34 now.
Wow, 34. So we'll try and get you to cover maybe 32 of them.
Don't ask me to name them.
Okay. All right. And so to his immediate right is Mark Morency, and Mark is the Senior Vice President Financial Institutions at Gallagher. And Mark's got extensive experience in working in the financial services sector, and only recently has joined the insurance community, so he can provide perspective on both sides of the equation. And to his immediate right is PARITOSH GAMBHIR, and PARITOSH is a partner in financial services and head of blockchain for KPMG. And so he's deep into this community. So we've got some interesting perspectives to bring to the table, and the one thing I like about working in this space in particular is that it's a very collaborative space. And so, while I'm, actively involved in the legal side, I can engage with people that have accounting experience and financial services experience and insurance experience, and because these are issues which have to be grappled with across the board. So. And I would encourage people to raise their hand throughout. I've got some questions here, and we've gone over some of the stuff, but please speak up and raise your points as well. So first off, I'm going to ask, and maybe I'll start with Ryan here, and we can get some input from others as well. What drew you to blockchain technology? Have you been interested in cutting-edge technologies and developments for a long time? And how did you get involved in advising on blockchain in your organization?
So having Paris Hilton selling ICOs is not the right answer.
People here? I'm going to pass the microphone down.
Hello? This isn't working.
We have mics, but I don't know if they're
Is that better? Wow. So I was trying to make a joke about Paris Hilton selling ICOs, but I guess it wasn't just the mic that didn't go over too well. So there you go. Hey, wake up the audience. I've always been a tech junkie and always been fascinated with the latest technology, and spent some spare time looking into this, and really intersected with my day job a little over 2.5 years ago, where we saw a significant uptick in phone calls and inquiries with players who were entering the space, and they were asking about what we could do from an audit, a controls, a tax perspective. And quite frankly, at that time, we didn't have a good solution. And we entered into discussions with one particular client who was trying to put together an ICO, which was Token Funder. And they challenged us quite directly to say, why can't we audit this stuff? And at that point, we really moved forward quite aggressively to look at developing a global solution there. And we're obviously not there quite yet, but really opened our eyes to the issues that were being faced by the market, and the role that we as a professional services firm to play in that space.
So I guess, same as Ryan, I've always been interested in emerging technologies. And as Ian mentioned, I've only recently become an insurance broker, which is maybe an insurance broker, of course, is an intermediary. So why go to an intermediary in a world that's disintermediating everything that we do? My previous employer, I won't mention who they are, but it was one of the largest banks in Canada, and they were very innovative and very big on emerging technologies. And in fact, they presented 2 of your panelists today. So,
but we're not going to mention it.
We won't mention who it is, though. But yeah, I was fortunate to have a 25-year career in banking. My most recent role was as the head of corporate insurance for that bank. And as such, I was the first major bank in Canada to purchase cyber insurance policy. And in having done that, I immediately got a phone call from 4 other banks saying, "What have you done? My board of directors is asking me why we don't have a cyber insurance policy." So through that experience, I realized that maybe I'd rather have more than one customer. And so that answers more of why I became an insurance broker as to why I came into these technologies. But as we'll talk about, and as you'll hear as we go through questions and answers, the insurance industry is not necessarily the quickest and most innovative industry all the time. And there's the whole ecosystem around blockchain and I would say emerging technologies in general needs insurance solutions. And so really, as part of my new role, that's what we're doing for our customers, is helping the insurance industry come to speed with this industry.
Thanks. So I guess just like the gentleman on the panel over here, I'm a bit of a tech junkie myself, although if I really went back to the first time I heard about Bitcoin, which was probably around 4 or 5 years ago, I thought it was not going to survive, but that's just my hunch then, which I got proved wrong. So, as part of my role, obviously being in the financial services space, a lot of our clients, just like Ryan was mentioning, started to ask about this. I was kind of a bit of the unique one over here because I actually got to learn about distributed ledger technologies before I got to learn about Bitcoin. Because a client came and said, hey, how is this going to impact me going forward? We've been hearing a lot of stuff going on, and so we sat down with them. I went through it. We had some of our tech experts on deck, and eventually I was like, wow, this is actually pretty revolutionary. I never knew this could actually possibly happen, and how it's going to change the world completely. We talk about it now, and everyone keeps thinking about it being a hype, but I'm going to say the next 2-3 years or 5 years, you will actually see more of this come about. And then it followed on to another client coming in saying, I want to invest into Bitcoin, and I was like, oh, I heard about that, but let me dive into it. And then we got into the whole wallets, mining, and all the crazy stuff that goes on with Bitcoin. And the world of cryptocurrencies is never going to go away. It's always going to stay here. I think it's exciting times for all of us. I can imagine on the panel, especially from Mark over here at some point. But yeah, that's how I got into blockchain and Bitcoin. So.
That's great. Well, okay, so we're gonna pass the mic around so everyone can hear. So, Paritosh, I'm going to stay with you. So, we've obviously seen lots of use cases for cryptocurrency. We've seen some sort of growth in activity in application of tokenized systems. But as an accountant and as a advisor on accounting issues, can you sort of delve into that a little bit and give us address sort of some of the challenges that you need to deal with from you're accounting for transactions or you're accounting for practices within a business, and you layer on a blockchain, or you take part of that away and you put some part of those transactions on a blockchain. How are you then applying those accounting rules that you have in existence, and maybe unpack that a little bit for us?
Sure.
And maybe get Ryan's input after.
Yeah. Sure. So maybe the one thing is just to make it clear is if you talk about blockchain as an enterprise solution and versus cryptos. So I'm going to focus my answer on crypto first, because the blockchain part of it is relatively a little bit more. I don't want to call it simple, but it's simpler. So if you start off with the cryptocurrency framework today, I think the number one problem in today's industry in general, forgetting accounting standard boards, is people still don't understand what blockchain is or understand how cryptocurrency works, and that's part of the bigger misdemeanor, if you want to call it. Once people get to understand it, that's when you can actually start to see standards evolve, including once regulators dive in and say this is how you should regulate it. Now, when it comes to cryptocurrencies and accounting, and I'll let some of my panelists also dive in over here, is that there's no authoritative literature that actually deals with how to account for cryptocurrency. Just like any new technology or any new product that comes out in the market, anything that's sort of unique, everything requires judgment. So for example, from a legal perspective, if for the lawyers in the room, if a new product comes out that's not dealt with in the current securities law or any law, you have to use your judgment to see where it lands in. Similar to cryptocurrencies, it doesn't meet the definition of financial asset. It doesn't meet the definition of cash. I don't want to bore you with the glory details of it, but it will meet the definition of, depending on what your business model or use is for that cryptocurrency. So when you're dealing with it from a finance perspective or an accounting perspective, my advice would be always to make sure you're talking to your auditors, make sure you're looking through the industry and seeing what happens. The IASB, which is the governing body that comes up with all the various standards, is aware of the fact that this is happening in the market, but just like any other body, they do take their time to come up with the standards, and we're hoping, I don't know, Ryan, next year, 2 years, maybe something may come up from an accounting perspective, right? And maybe they'll tweak the existing rules, or maybe they'll keep the rules as it is, or maybe they'll come up with a separate draft of a paper. We haven't received any exposure drafts as yet, but when we do, we will comment on them. The second part of it is just from an audit perspective. I think, if you ever get into the grapple of why are some firms not accepting audit of cryptocurrencies, just Ryan already mentioned this, is I think you have to be ready to take on a certain type of client. First of all, I think you need to have the expertise to do so, and maybe 2 years ago, I think a lot of the big four firms or a lot of the other firms, I don't think had the expertise to take this on. But we're all developing solutions now because cryptocurrencies are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And as we go along, we have to hire experts who will help us get through this process. It's still, I think the hesitation still comes as to say that we want this to be more regulated, to be able to actually serve that from a reputational perspective. But I think there are solutions that other firms are coming up. And I feel like I'm hogging the mic now, so I'm going to pass it to Ryan.
I'm just going to pass it down. I'm just the buffer between the accountants.
Good job. Did you want to tell a joke? No joke?
No.
No. Do you know why people that like Bitcoin don't like Ferraris?
Why?
Because it's owned by fiat. All right. Well, thank you. The little Bitcoin humor. As Paritosh was mentioning, that the Accounting Standards Board really hasn't delved into. There was a discussion in September with their interpretations committee, IFRIC, where they were talking about some of the issues. No clear direction yet as to development of standards, and it's a tricky issue because it's tough to know where to really start. Because this particular topic, and again focusing on the crypto side for a minute, doesn't really touch just one standard out there from an accounting perspective. It impacts financial instruments, revenue, debt. It's really across the board, intangibles. So what we've done as part of our group, and Ian mentioned that we've put together this working group that we have 34 countries on. We're trying to develop a single point of view across the globe, right? It doesn't make sense to have a Canadian view of what this stuff is and then have a firm from Hong Kong say, no, we disagree. So we need to have a single point of view for this global product. And when we delved into it, the first thing that we looked at is what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about crypto? Everybody normally gravitates towards Bitcoin, and that's really the currency side of it. But when you delve into it, there are utility tokens, there's asset-backed tokens, and then there's security tokens as well. So we look at it at 4 different type of classes of coins or tokens, and each one has their own specific accounting treatment. So you just really can't look at the topic of crypto and have the same accounting treatment across the board. With that, we then delved into a number of the different use cases. We have exchanges, we have ICOs, we have miners, we have funds that are starting to hold this as an investment. And again, each one has their own specific issues that they are dealing with. Maybe I'll touch on 2 particular topics. One from the ICO or the token or ITO token perspective. The topic of revenue recognition has been front and center there. A lot of times when you have a token holder, in many ways they're looking at it that they're trying to make a quick buck here, right? That they're buying it, the future potential is massive, and they want to try to double or triple their earnings very quickly. But when you dig into the actual contract that they've entered into, there's some pretty specific terms there and other reasons why this token exists, right? It might give them access to a platform. It might give them service rights, and that layer of information is really where you have to dig into, because that's the agreement that they've entered into. And when you look at it from a revenue recognition perspective, one of the things that we ask ourselves is, who's party to this contract and who is the customer? And you think about this, and a lot of it's anonymous, and you don't know who's on the other side. Trying to get into that level of detail is critical to determining if you record revenue, when you record revenue, and how much you record. And this also intersects very closely from a tax perspective. We had one client who was adamant that they did an ICO, they raised X dollars, that was revenue, right? It was in their pocket. They didn't have to give it back if the platform didn't succeed. It was revenue. Like, okay, well, if you go down that path where we don't necessarily agree it should be revenue, we think it should be deferred over the life of the platform that you're developing, you don't have a tax problem, because you then have to recognize all of that up front and pay taxes on it. And then the conversation obviously shifted quite quickly, and they all bought into this deferral concept. But the intersection of all of this is very important to look at. With respect to off-balance sheet accounting, when you look at some of these exchanges, they hold crypto assets within the exchange. If they are going to produce a set of financial statements, how do they record the tokens or the coins that they are holding? Whose asset is this really? Is it the exchange's asset, or is it the customer's asset? And then you have to dig into, like, are the assets actually segregated? Are they in their own wallet where that exchange can't touch it without the authorization of the individual investor? When you dig into some of these exchanges, some of them don't have the assets segregated. Some of them obviously have hot wallets and cold wallets, and they do segregation. But there are some that there's one pool of assets, and if you ask who actually owns it, it's the exchange that actually owns it from a legal perspective, and then you have to divvy up the ownership rights from a customer perspective. And this ties really closely into the fact that we don't have a single legal framework for these exchanges, or at least a legal framework that makes sense for what they are doing. And many look at it as saying, well, they're actually a broker-dealer. But the legal securities framework hasn't recognized them as that. They recognize them more as like a money service business. So there are some things that you have to dig into to determine whether or not these things are on and off balance sheet. There is no single answer for the industry right now, but looking at ownership rights, segregation, and ultimately coming down to the question, if this thing went bankrupt and the exchange shut down, do you actually have ownership rights as a customer, or are you saying goodbye to those assets and as part of the bankruptcy proceedings?
So fascinating. So I'm learning lots here. That what you're describing there is sort of consistent with some of the experiences we've had. We've got entrepreneurs or groups of people who have seen great promise here and just have driven really fast and been quite successful. And then when you unpack the legal issues or the accounting issues, you realize, well, they've done things, or they may have done things which they may not have intended, and it can result in some challenges. That leads us into the next thing I wanted us to address here, and Mark, this is for you. With all this hype and all this excitement around blockchain, and with all these opportunities, we've also seen lots of volatility in prices of Bitcoin and Ether and so on, and some high-profile losses and some investigations. But we got businesses that are growing. We got joint ventures with financial institutions and big organizations that are spending a lot of money in this, and obviously they want insurance. So, how do you put insurance in place in these challenging times? And what are you advising people as a broker in this situation? Shall I give you the mic? There you go.
So, from an insurance perspective, I think a lot of these same accounting and legal issues that you've heard about, both from our panel and from the previous panel, have an impact on your ability to insure it. If you can't prove legal ownership, if you don't know who actually owns it or who was holding it, because Bitcoin, no one actually holds the Bitcoins, right? You hold a key that gives you access to your Bitcoins, but you're not holding them. How do you insure something? You have to have an insurable interest in something. For example, I might have a real interest in my neighbor's house not burning down, but I can't insure my neighbor's house. I can only insure my own house. And so this is one of the issues that there is with insurance is until you resolve some of these accounting and legal issues, that causes problems for the insurers. In general, though, as far as insuring companies, maybe splitting it into two types of companies. You have the larger companies, let's say, doing a blockchain project. So an RBC, they're very involved with many blockchain projects. They have to be careful about some of the things like ownership of data, ownership of what's the technology that's in there. Blockchain by its nature is a distributed ledger. What happens if you have a cyber breach? Is that actually going to be tracked insurance under your cyber insurance policy, given that you didn't actually hold that data? So again, it's those same problems. On the other side of it, where we're having a lot of clients come in and where we're helping a lot of clients that are working around the infrastructure of blockchain or cryptocurrencies. I'll often talk about both, and I realize that the two are separate, but I think that cryptocurrency makes a good example for a lot of the accounting and insurance issues, because it's the sort of largest use case that's out there yet. So I don't know how many people here are in a company that really blockchain is your business. Now, if blockchain's incidental to your business, probably not a problem for insurance. If blockchain is your business, insurers are very concerned about this technology. They don't necessarily understand it. The underwriters are learning it as we learn the issues that come along. And so the first thing when customers come to me for insurance, the first thing I advise them is, one, it's going to take a long time. It does take longer to buy insurance for a blockchain company than it does for other types of startups. And really what our job as an insurance broker is to sit with you and walk the insurer through what it is you're doing. And so having a good sense of what you're doing is important. A lot of, there's almost this dichotomy between marketing your company versus insuring your company. A lot of my customers, they'll be, let's say, outsourcing blockchain technology. Their website will talk about everything from ICOs to wallets to everything that's out there, basically. But in reality, when you delve into what they're doing, they may actually have a very small piece of programming that they're doing. And it should be just a technology company, as easy to insure as any other type of technology. So being careful about being realistic about what it is that you're doing helps us to find you the insurance you need. The insurance is out there. I would say that it's a much tougher marketing of your company to get us there with the insurer and really have the insurer understanding what you're doing.
Do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah.
So a majority of my clients that come to me and say, we're going to get insurance, and there's usual reference to the Lloyd's syndicate giving some form of assurance. Is that insurance generally, and I'm not talking about enterprise blockchain, but more around Bitcoin or any cryptocurrencies, does that generally tend to be expensive? Because that's the feedback that I'm getting.
Yes. Probably. It really depends on what the client does. And that's where I say that it takes a long time to secure the insurance. And I would start thinking about the insurance until you need it, because the more we can narrow down what it is that you're exactly doing, the more we can narrow down is why you're buying the insurance in the first place. There's a lot of companies that are building applications or building a fintech type of, maybe a tokenized payment system, something like that, that the reason you need insurance is because you're not going to sell it to a bank without the bank contract requiring you to have insurance. So we can really work with you to make sure that insurance is both covering enough of what you need insured. You do want your insurance to be triggered when you need it. At the same time, not being sort of just broad brush that it's going to be anything goes wrong with blockchain, the price goes down all of a sudden, or the price of Bitcoin goes down, and all of a sudden you're paying out an insurance claim. So working with us to work with your insurance company and really understand why you're buying the insurance is a good first step towards getting that price down. Anything you want to add?
Nope. So we've delved a little bit about risk and sort of dealing with insurance as a way to mitigate against risk. But I think the three panelists here have had some material experience in dealing with business processes. And we've been throwing around terms this morning about like cybersecurity and AML compliance and privacy breaches and so forth. But I wonder if I can get perspective from all three of you on what do you think the most challenging risks are from a implementation of a blockchain system, and how you mitigate against them in addition to insurance. And Ryan, maybe I'll start with you.
Okay. And as Mark mentioned, that there's a number of risks within here, and that comes into play when you issue insurance. The things that we look at from our perspective are some of the major challenges that the industry is facing, and again, splitting between blockchain and crypto. Blockchain is not as, by itself, is not as significant from a risk perspective, and that obviously comes into play when you're looking at insurance. From a crypto perspective, the things that we're looking at are AML. You have funds moving cross-border, and that's a very significant challenge for the industry right now. The fact that there's a lot of anonymity in the marketplace, and that's one of the selling points early on was be anonymous, and there were some players within the industry that were using crypto for illegitimate purposes. And if you are now participating in that ecosystem, or the coin that you now have purchased previously was used for criminal activity down the road, how do you mitigate that risk for yourself as an enterprise? Cybersecurity obviously is another significant risk here. In many ways, you look at humans in that cybersecurity, with respect to cybersecurity, and humans are the weak link here, right? The technology itself is designed that, it's quote unquote unhackable, and the blockchains are secure, but you start introducing humans into that picture, and you all of a sudden open up a number of other risks. Looking at some of the exchanges, all it takes is for you to have your password insecure. I think now most exchanges are up to speed where there's multi-signatures or two-factor authentication and other controls that have been put into place, but all it takes is give out your password to the wrong person or forget about it, and there's some cybersecurity implications right there.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the biggest, most fascinating risks is also one of the strengths of the system is your private key. And one of the panelists earlier today, this morning, mentioned about banking and sort of online banking passwords versus the private key. Once your private key is lost, it is unrecoverable, and that's just the end of it. I think more Bitcoins have probably been lost to people just mislocating their key than any other cause. And so, it's one thing to have a password security, and I can always call up my bank and I forgot my password and re-identify who I am. But that private key, if you have a tokenized system, is the absolute, to me, the riskiest thing that you can possibly have, is something that once it's gone, it's permanent, there's no way of recovering it. Now I also, kind of to divert a little bit, I also find it interesting, we talk about blockchain as being basically taking trust out of the system. And while it does take the need for trust with my counterparty out of the way, I still need to store that private key somewhere if it's a tokenized system. So in fact, there's new trust relationships coming in. And we have a lot of clients that are doing cold storage, for example. Well, if I'm giving someone my private key to go into cold storage, that's an awfully big trust relationship that I'm building with that counterparty. So I would argue that actually trust hasn't been removed as a necessity in the system. It's just been relocated to somewhere else.
Okay. So, I agree with all our panelists have said. I think one of the bigger misconceptions with blockchain is that it's secure. It's secure because of the way things are recorded on the blockchain, not because it's not susceptible to hacks around the blockchain, right? So introducing humans or introducing exchanges or systems that are managed around it is where cybersecurity becomes absolutely critical. AML obviously is, and I think we've already touched on that from a cybersecurity perspective as well. There's different solutions that are being built out there today to sort of, I think there's KYC, which is know your customer, getting somebody on board to come say, hey, come onto my exchange and come trade on Bitcoin or these other 5 securities that I have, or utilities, whichever way it goes, or hybrids. It's how do I monitor ongoing transactions with Bitcoin, which is clearly quite a concern. If I shift my hat a little bit away from crypto and focus on enterprise, and I think the panel before did talk about this, because from a permissioned blockchain environment, privacy is probably top 3 factors that people need to be considering. What can you share on your blockchain today? What can you not? And is it customer data? Is it not customer data? Is it a trade secret? If I'm moving into a derivative syndicate that's doing a mark-to-market, am I using a curve that I'll be giving away proprietary information from? There's various things that you would have to consider. We're finding a lot more from a privacy perspective that we're getting our privacy experts involved, especially with GDPR coming along the way and PIPEDA and all the local regulations as they apply. So I would definitely put from a crypto perspective, I think the risks are pretty clear. From an enterprise perspective, there are things that you still need to take into consideration. While blockchain solves a lot of problems, you still have to face challenges like privacy, and obviously, getting lawyers involved to make sure your smart contracts are developed, depending on how you structure them.
Maybe I'll just mention one last thing. The other thing that we are grappling with is regulatory risk, and you think that you should have regulators there to protect your interest, and you do. But if you're running a business, you also don't know where the regulators will land tomorrow. We've had a number of organizations approach us who had their operations in Asia and they were shut down, and now they're looking to set up shop in another jurisdiction. There's a lot of risk out there right now. Until we get a stable regulatory framework, there's risk really across the board there.
That's helpful. I want to get to the international aspects of things, but I want to touch on a couple other points first. And by the way, if you've got a question, please raise your hand, because we've got some smart people here, and I'm sure they'd like to get some perspective from people. So I got one question, then maybe we'll go to the audience. We kind of talked about, there's been a lot of focus on cryptocurrencies and so on, but when Hillary started this morning, she went through a lot of use cases in a bunch of other sectors, and we're dealing with companies that are looking at blockchain and energy and supply chain and financial and trade finance, and we heard about opportunities to get a better voting system and so on. And those are all businesses too. They all need insurance. They all need to deal with accounting and audit issues. Paritosh, why don't we start with you on this one? What are some of are the challenges different for companies in those situations? Are there accounting and audit challenges in those situations that you need to deal with that are more or easier to deal with?
So, why don't I start off with, again, I'm a strong believer in the power of the technology as it stands today and how it could possibly revolutionize the world, 3-4 years from now. Am I particularly concerned from a particular industry, for example? I think every industry should be concerned, or players in that industry should be concerned to a certain extent. If I'm going to be removed from the system, then what should I be doing, right? At the same time, you could look at it as an opportunity. For me, everyone should look at it as an opportunity, right? And there's a concept of, do you want to be the disruptor or do you want to be disrupted, right? And how do you put yourself ahead of the curve looking at that? So if you think of people who are doing it today, who have come up with public announcements, right? The NASDAQs of the world. Other sort of people who have claimed, and I can't mention their names, who claim that they may be removed from the process. So either the reason why I can't move forward, or I'm not going to be removed from the ecosystem, is because I'm going to become the disruptor, and I'm going to build my own blockchain that will put you onto the system, so that you don't say, oh, I don't need a NASDAQ in this world. I'm not suggesting that you don't need NASDAQ, right? The second thing is obviously regulation, right? And we've touched upon this, is you can't just remove somebody from the system. If you ever think of a P2P trading securities economy today, removing somebody like a CDS or the exchanges around it or the custodians around it, I mean, these are well-established, reputable businesses for the last 50, 60 years, right? But I think going back to sort of, if there's something that I would be concerned about is, number one, if you're doing an ICO and it's not in a regulated fashion, I would definitely be concerned. Definitely get a lawyer involved. There's some very smart lawyers at this firm sitting right in front of me as well. If you're doing something that's from a pure enterprise accounting and audit perspective, there's no much sort of accounting issues dealing with enterprise blockchain, depending on what you're using it for, but from an audit perspective, they will be what we call today. So if you're in a permissioned environment and you have 5 people, or let's just say the 5 banks, one person has to take responsibility for the blockchain. One person is going to be what we call the operator. So how do we know the operator is doing what they're supposed to be doing today? you would get something what they call an equivalent of a SOC 1 or an internal controls report. So today when you go to CIBC Mellon, who custodies your securities, or RBC that custodies your securities, how do you know they're doing what they're supposed to be doing? Well, they issue what they call a 3416 or an equivalent of a SOC 1 internal controls report, which tells you that these are the 20 controls that we have in place, and we've got an independent auditor to come check to make sure it actually happens. Because apart from privacy, there's other things of node management. Who do you want to be on the chain? Who do you not want to be on the chain? Should I add this 6th bank coming into the economy, or should I add the 7th insurance company onto this chain? Who is this chain? Do I trust my vendor that's coming onto the chain? So
I sort of forget what the original question is, but I'll answer it anyway. I think it'll be interesting to see how blockchain performs as a great equalizer in this system. With that trust, let's say, being shifted, you don't need to do your payment system through a major bank anymore. If someone else builds a blockchain-based, there's a lot of fintechs out there building payment systems. Well, if I don't need to worry about trust, I don't need it to have been built by the largest bank anymore. Now, at the same time, on the other side of it, who's likely to build the better system? The bank that can spend $1 billion on it, or the fintech who's building it in the garage? So I'm not sure that the banks necessarily have to be afraid of the new fintechs coming in, but at the same time, they do have to be aware, and they have to be spending the money. They have to be doing the blockchain research. On the other side of it, if you're one of those small companies trying to break in, perhaps there's a little bit of let them spend the money to figure out the research and then use it later on. So it's a world of being very aware of what your counterparties are doing. The other piece I want to bring to that, though, is, and again, it's sort of redrumming something you could have heard 20 years ago, but it really is just as relevant today, is the multinational internationalization of it. I don't necessarily need my counterparties to be in Canada anymore. If on the blockchain, it really doesn't matter where they are. So what is happening on other parts of the world? And are we viewing it from a global point of view? The reason I say that, I want to give an example and revert back to cryptocurrency. I've traveled earlier this year quite a bit through Southeast Asia, and a few weeks ago I was in South America. We look at Bitcoin and we look at, oh my gosh, Bitcoin is below $4,000 now, what has happened? We look at Bitcoin as an investment. The rest of the world looks at Bitcoin as just a payment system. And there's, and this was part of some of the original slides that we saw at the beginning of the day. There are I forget what the number was from the slide, 1.2 billion people or something that are unbanked today. And cryptocurrencies allow them the opportunity to just do banking. And so this is where it really is a payment system. A lot of these, there's this plethora of minor currencies. A lot of these minor cryptocurrencies are regional cryptocurrencies, and they really are used as the payment system in small patches of India or small patches of other places around the world. And so our mindset, I think, has to evolve a little bit, that this isn't an investment tool. It is something that people are using. And maybe the price of Bitcoin will go down and it'll only be 2,000. It'll still always be something that will exist. It's not, the price isn't going down because it's dying. The price is just going down because maybe we misjudged what it is. And maybe I'll make one more comment, by the way, on that volatility, and we make such news about the volatility of Bitcoin. I started my career trading foreign exchange, and at that time the Canadian dollar was about 60 cents US. Now, if you remember, a few years ago, Canadian dollar was $1.20, and now it's about 75 cents US. So that seems to me like a pretty volatile currency too. I'm not sure that we are overplaying this whole volatility of cryptocurrencies. Back when I was a foreign exchange trader, one of the basic things that you knew is that anyone who speculates on foreign exchange is a fool, because you can't see all the factors that are driving the price of a currency. So maybe one of those questions with Bitcoin is it a currency? Is it a security? Is it a utility? That hasn't really been answered yet.
Yeah, we definitely have a third world bias here, right? Or first world bias. We don't actually put ourselves in the shoes of those others, and look at Venezuela right now, and it's really an important tool there to allow them to transact to actually have some kind of store of value. We're looking at volatility, and their currency was devalued. If they're holding the bolivar there, they basically have nothing left. But if they were holding Bitcoin or another crypto asset, they have some kind of store of value left, and this repeats itself really across the globe in many other examples. Back to the original question, I think that was being asked. In Don Tapscott's book, Blockchain Revolution, there is a section in there on the audit profession and the impact that will potentially have. And it is obviously thought-provoking and a bit controversial, but it does open your eyes where the PwCs and KPMGs of the world, where 10, 15, 20 years down the road, would there be a need for a third-party firm to come in and audit a set of accounts, or provide some kind of comfort or validation, where you have a blockchain that is transparent and immutable, and it's all verifiable. Why do you need a third party to come in and verify that for you? So industries really across the board can be disrupted here, and nobody knows exactly how the future will play out, but I think it all makes us pause and open our eyes and see what the potential implications can be.
Thanks. I want to ask the audience here if we've got any questions for our colleagues here. Sir.
Yes, taking a look in your crystal ball 10 years hence, what do you think the future is for the Canadian chartered banks? If we can do things in third world countries with simply a cell phone or a smartphone, can't we do it here and do away with all the banks?
Did everyone hear that question? So, what will the future of the Canadian banks be in 10 years if we can do all this stuff on blockchain? Anyone want to take that one first? Mark.
I mean, there are what, 5,000 banks in the U.S. There's 5 major banks, but actually about 26 Schedule 1 banks in Canada, and who knows how many tens of thousands of banks around the world. There's definitely going to be less banks 10 years from now. I do think the Canadian banks will be some of them. They will survive. I don't think they'll look like they do today. Now, as a, let's say, blockchain practitioner, I won't sit here smugly though and say, oh, look what's going to happen to the banks. I think we actually have to look at what's going to happen 10 years down the road too. 2 weeks ago, I was in Virginia at Virginia Tech. And at Virginia Tech, they're building a quantum computing center. And when quantum computing, they're spending a lot of money on this, so they must think that they're going to actually get it right. So let's say 3 to 5 years from now, quantum computing comes online. A lot of those public blockchains actually become suddenly irrelevant because a quantum computer can instantaneously rewrite the whole chain. And so the blockchain is absolutely immutable and absolutely secure until it's not. And quantum computing will mean that it's not. So no matter what, and this is probably what attracts me to emerging technologies, because as soon as a technology emerges, another one emerges that makes it irrelevant. I'm not saying that blockchain will be irrelevant, but I'm saying that what it looks like today, it probably won't look like 10 years from now.
Sure. So,
That's a very thought-provoking point.
Yeah. I mean, I think one point on quantum computing, it could be that it could solve the problem for energy on a blockchain, right? But it all depends how you're using the quantum computing. And it's a really good question, sir. Where do I see the banks 10 years from now? I mean, Mark's got it right. You don't know. There's going to be a lot of consolidation. It also depends on, I think, what would drive more of it is how fast regulation moves faster. For example, I think, for most people in the banking industry today, like if you know Payments Canada is going through a whole revamp of their systems today. And I think, they may have or may not have piloted DLT. I think they came up with a report on Project Jasper recently. about how they're planning to use DLT. And I think one of the challenges is that if you take payments and put that on a blockchain, but you can't do it minus the securities or mutual fund units that are in the industry today, because payments and sort of investments go hand in hand. So I think their next phase was to look at how they can revitalize that and cohere to it together. So I know TMX and CDS are working on something with them to see how they could leverage DLT technologies from payments and investments perspective. Now, if you think of that going forward and the regulators approving that, the faster that goes, you'll see a lot more changes coming through. What I think you'll see in the next 5 years is a lot of other players being cut out. So some of the pilots that the banks have done right now, from a blockchain perspective, the intention could be to sort of speed up things or make it more efficient. But you'll find globally trade finance will change quite significantly, because now you actually know who your counterparty is. It's the solving of trust problem, right? I don't want to order something from you in the middle of, you could be in Asia, Africa, or South America, or in the US, because I don't know who you are. Well, I'm not going to make something for you until I know who you are. So if I have a chain that actually discloses the information, and I have a bank that actually deals with that on the chain, then it will totally change the way trade finance works today, along with supply chain.
I'll just add maybe part of my optimism why I think the Canadian banks will still be there and why the Canadian system will be a leader. On November 15th, the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, and the Singapore Monetary Authority put out a paper on blockchain. So I'm blockchain in the payment system. So I'm very optimistic that if our regulators stay up to speed, and if you have people like the Bank of Canada putting out these kind of papers, we could really be a leader in this field.
I just have to be careful with what I say, because banks are very important to our business right now. But if you look at one aspect of the bank's business, which is the lending side, definitely we'll have disruption on the payment side. Will that look different 10 years from now? But you look at the bank's core business, which is lending, net interest margin. There always will be a need for capital in the world, and obviously we see different ways with ICOs and how capital is being raised. But that role, I think, will definitely be there in 10 years' time.
Thanks for the thought-provoking question there. It's a good one. I think we have
10 years in Delaware.
Yeah, exactly. Do we have another question from the audience? All right. I think I got time for one more question. Sorry.
Sorry to be
a follow-up. Here we go.
It's going to be very disruptive. We've danced around the topic of CRA, Canadian Revenue Agency. Have they really clarified their position with regard to cryptocurrencies?
So the question was, has CRA clarified their views with regards to cryptocurrency? Unfortunately, I don't have my tax partner on the panel here with me, but she would be able to tell you. But do you gentlemen want to take the tax question? Viewpoints on how cryptocurrency is treated?
Crowd who has an answer to that question.
Okay. So I think that has been advanced, and we can take that off. Take that after the call. Be good. On a day when you hear GM cutting 10,000 jobs, including a whole bunch of jobs in Oshawa, which is unfortunate, and we spent a lot of time talking about disruption, but we also had a lot of talk about opportunities as well, which is great. And so I want to get some views from each of the panelists before we go here on, you're actively involved in a bunch of jurisdictions. Mark, seems like you travel the globe, which is pretty cool. And Ryan, you're working with 34 different countries on some audit standards. And PARITOSH, you're a man of the world too. As Canadians, who we've got lots of we tout the fact that we've got blockchain innovators, and we've got some of them in the room here. We've got AI is a big thing. We've got 2 centers of quantum computing, one at Waterloo, one at UBC, and I think there's another one at U of T. So that we're tackling these interesting issues. But from your perspective, what can Canadians do from the perspective of entrepreneurs, people that are backing them from a financial perspective, regulators? What can we do better today so that in 10 years from now, we're not talking about the demise of big banks in Canada like we're hearing about the demise of lots of jobs at GM?
Canada really has a very important role to play in this, and I think we're often a little bit too shy to be seen as a leader in the global marketplace. We always think that it has to be done better somewhere else in the globe. But you look at the talent that we have in the Canadian landscape right now, and it's every other day there's another press release about a technology company opening up a shop here or expanding the number of jobs that they have. So there really is a ton of potential, and there's a ton of talent that we have in the Canadian market. We need to really leverage that talent and make sure that they do have the tools available to succeed, and that that links in with the regulatory landscape, the sandbox that the OSC has, and out west. Let's give those companies the tools that they need to actually grow their business and become a global player. Let's get those regulations solved and make sure that there's complete clarity as to what they can do and what they can't do, and allow them to focus on the business that they have and actually grow their companies.
Yeah, I would reiterate the same thing. Now, I'm not necessarily an expert on where in the world technologies are coming from, but just from our experience and as far as where requests are coming, certainly a great portion of that innovation is coming from Canada. And in fact, as far as requests for insurance, probably the only other countries that are where we're seeing just as much as maybe Switzerland and Singapore. I think that Canada should focus on emerging technologies as a whole. I wouldn't put all of our eggs into one blockchain basket, but we have some of the leading professors on things like artificial intelligence and many other interrelated technologies. I think over time you'll find that artificial intelligence, blockchain could be very helpful to the people who are researching that type of field. But I'm very optimistic of where we are right now. I've never seen such and really coast to coast, such a large participation in an industry that is emerging in the world.
So I think your question brought into not just blockchain, but any innovation in general, right? So I'll tackle that really quickly in terms of every company or every organization, every individual in this room, every lawyer, every accountant, doesn't matter. Your jobs, I'm not saying are at risk, but you have to continue to think differently and do differently every single day. Otherwise, you will become extinct. You have to think in a way that's saying, how can my company's leading down this path. I quote the CEO of Time Warner from 2009 or 2010, where he was asked the question, do you think Netflix is a threat? And he said, is the Albanian army going to take over the world? Or something of that sort. Now, as inappropriate as that is, well, look at where Time Warner is and where Netflix is. Netflix, last I checked, their market cap was around $80 to $90 billion, and Time Warner almost went bankrupt. Okay, so taking that example and asking yourself as a company or as an individual or as a lawyer or as an accountant, how am I going to think differently going forward? And part of why I but focus on my role in blockchain is because we briefly spoke about the audit profession going 10 years from now. How do I focus my efforts or change my thinking to actually be able to still harness the audit profession while having a blockchain? Now, if I touch specifically on blockchain itself, I think we've touched on government. Now, the role that government has to play in any sort of emerging technology space, including blockchain itself, is kind of critical because the more the government invests into something, the more that technology is going to get harnessed and the more innovative you're going to get. Now, whilst we're quite progressive over here, I'd say progressive in North America, when it comes to blockchain technology, I think we're not as close to being where Asia is today. For example, in Singapore, you would be actually practically subsidized or funded to do a blockchain project in Singapore by the government, depending on what that is. If you see some of the stuff that's coming out in Asia, generally it's a lot faster than where we are today. I'm not saying the Canadian government should push faster. We're pretty progressive as it is, but from a North American standpoint, we are definitely ahead of some of our peers over here. The other thing I will say is that the talent that we have from a blockchain perspective in Canada is absolutely pretty immaculate. But what we see most of it doing is going outside the country than inside. So that's one more thing that I think we'd have to tackle over here, and maybe that's government or the community getting together and saying, how do we retain the talent or retain the work that you're doing and use it here for the Canadian market? There is research that's been done to say that Toronto, Waterloo, or Kitchener region will be the next Silicon Valley, but I think we're still far off from there. I know John Tory has been trying to convince some of the Canadians to come back, right? But I think our policies in general, government being progressive, it will get us there. But I think we can move faster, but I think we're doing pretty well at the same time.
So thanks very much. I want to just thank our panel here for some very thoughtful, creative, in-depth thinking, and for some optimistic end to a discussion this morning. So thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ian. Thank you all for coming. I'm hopeful that you all learned a lot. I certainly did this morning. In a morning, took in so much information. I want to leave you with two things. The first is that you may have heard from Patricia that, in fact, our firm has been giving presentations to different institutions. And so what we try to do is to see and learn a little bit about your business. And we come in and we present to your group about the impact of blockchain technology and some thoughts of legal issues that your own group should be maybe thinking about. So we're happy to do that. Feel free to reach out to myself or any of the professionals at Gowlings that you met here today. And then the last is that we have a lunch for all of you today. It's really an opportunity to meet each other. This is an area with very, very complicated issues, and I can tell you that it's a very collegial bar, a very collegial group, and the best way to learn is to meet each other and to learn from each other, and so we're happy to encourage that here today as well. So thank you once again. Thank you to all of our speakers and presenters, and thank you again for coming.